saying the Labour Party and repression. Thank you, Ranjit.
So, wow, that's that. Thank you, comrades. Lovely to be here, lovely to see you today. We're just talking about Labour Party being the agent of repression and who will bring fascism. It's important to say fascism won't come to this country until the working people learn to stand up for themselves. And I'm really sorry to say, walking around the gala today, compared to 20 years ago when I used to come here, there are few signs of the working people standing up for themselves. The Durham Gala came out of some of the finest traditions of the most militant sections of the British working class, of organised labour, of the miners' struggle. The miners, if you think of a black-leg miner as a story of the way in which workers learnt to struggle together for their interests against capital, of their hatred of those who would betray that struggle. There goes the black-leg miner. Precisely because they knew that solidarity to stand together against the interests of capital was necessary to preserve them and their interests and their families. And that's something we need to reclaim. We can see the effect of de-industrialization, of the massive assault on the miners in 1984, have had upon organised labour. When there was a strong miners' union, when there was a strong miners' industry, there was no such thing as a 0 hours contract in our country. We wouldn't have stood for it. What do you mean a 0 hours contract? You mean you're going to employ me but give me no work? You're going to employ me, but I have to stand by the telephone my whole life. And if I don't respond to your call, then you'll sack me. But I'll get 3 hours of work, or 5 hours of work, or 11 hours of work, so little work that when I get my money, I actually can't afford to live on it. So I have to still live with my parents and beg. So I'm actually homeless, sofa surfing in my parents' house, allegedly employed, not officially unemployed, because I've got a 0 hours contract. And there are millions, there are 4 million people on 0 hours contracts, and we've lost our minds. I used to work, I'm a surgeon, I worked in the NHS. I do work in the NHS, I worked in Yorkshire. And I used to find that the generation of people I was treating, I'm a vascular surgeon with arterial disease, they were proud people. They worked in the mines, they worked in the steel industry, they worked in, in machining, in mechanics. But they had industrial diseases and arterial disease, but they were proud. They had lived a good life, they had their own house, they had their own community, they had had holidays, they had a certain level of existence, and they had identity as working class men and women. Their children, when I went into the miners' village that no longer had mines and no longer had steel, no longer had mills and no longer had industry, were broken. They were overwhelmingly obese and out of shape because they had the diet as if they were going to the mines, but they don't bloody work. Yeah? No fault of their own, that was their culture. They had heroin in the villages and PlayStation in the villages, but no meaningful employment and no meaningful connection to their neighbour. They fought with themselves. A broken generation. That generation hasn't come from nowhere. It's come from the export of capital. It didn't come from immigration. It wasn't immigrants who took the miners' jobs. It was Thatcher as a representative of the neoliberal imperial class who said, you know, we could pay these miners this much money, but it'd be far more money to be made if we instead use child miners in Colombia and import coal for our coal stations from there, whilst destroying the miners in order to liberalise the workforce so that their children and their children's children will be on 0 hours contract. We can pay them virtually nothing and maximise our profit. You can applaud that. It's not that it's a good idea. It's that, like, why are we not told this by people who are campaigning for a working class vote? Why do they not say we can have jobs that are meaningful, we can have communities that are meaningful, we can have a lifestyle that's meaningful based on our own labour and solidarity? That our enemy are not other workers, because that's what ultimately immigrants are. My father's Indian. I was born here, born in Hemel Hempstead, in a little place that used to be the headquarters of the National Front when I grew up. So I'm familiar with anti-immigrant rhetoric, I'm familiar with what the workers are told. But the fact that they all thought they could buy their own home when I was a child, Thatcher gave us the right to buy our own homes. Amazing, we've all become homeowners. Aren't you privileged that you're a homeowner? Forget that home is just like the basic necessity of life without which you can't live. What's been the result of selling all the millions of council houses were sold to people who suddenly thought they'd changed from being a worker into being middle class? And what's the result? The house prices went up and up and up. Maybe a couple of people made a bit of money by selling their homes. And what happened to their children and their children's children? Their generation rent. They can't afford a mortgage even, let alone to buy a house. House prices over the last 15 years have doubled. And what's happened to your wages? They're the same. And the monetary value of your wages has gone down. So working people in our country are being crushed. That's directly linked to the fact that the organised jobs were exported, capital was exported, jobs were exported, our communities were crushed, and we're given a certain kind of lifestyle with a certain amount of handout. They even talk about something called universal basic income. You might as well call it universal basic, bribery. It's like, a little bit of beggary, universal basic beggary. You give everyone a little begging, just enough to live as long as you're good, but you don't actually have productive work, you don't have power. And who owns all the land in this country? Overwhelmingly. If you take up everyone's home who has a home, forget the 5, 6, 7 million homeless, everyone's home, if you add it up and you see what it is, it's less than 5% of the total land surface area of Britain. So who owns the 95% of the land? The same people who sit in the city of London and own everything else. They own the capital, they own the land, they're the ones who control the jobs, they control our political system. And they are the ones who decide. They will call a Labour leader and decide in the City of London whether that Labour leader has what it takes to become our next Prime Minister. And Corbyn, inoffensive as he is, he didn't offer anything more than a bit of free internet and a bit less student fees. But that was unacceptable to the barons of finance capital at this time. So they said no, and they sabotaged him, and they used the Labour Party apparatus to do it. We have walked around today with this free sheet that we've given out, like a mini paper, which we designed, and it says quite provocatively but quite sincerely, this is quite sincere, it's not a throwaway comment, that Labour is the enemy of the working class. And we decided that we were going to have something equivalent to this, point out to people at this great Labour festival, where in fact the Durham Miners Committee wrote to us and asked us not to bring a banner with a picture of any communist leaders on it because it was against their ethos. But this is a Labour festival, and yet the Labour festival can let anyone come. If I want to come and sell coffee or hot dogs or slushies, if I want to pump you full of sugar and unhealth, that's okay. But if I want to encourage you to think that there might be a different world that's possible, like the ragged trousered philanthropist, that you stop making palaces for the wealthy and in fact take back the very wealth that your Labour's created, I'm unwelcome here. And we have to ask ourselves why that is. And I put to you that it's because it's connected so intimately with the Labour Party, and the Labour Party has become an integral part of the apparatus of our enemy class. So that it's the Labour Party themselves who encourage repression. We decided on this kind of general theme of talk long before what we saw last weekend. Did anyone turn on the telly or look at the papers last weekend? You'll be aware there's a genocide going on in Gaza, and our Labour Party is running it. And there are mass demonstrations on our street who think it's wrong to participate in a genocide. And that, in fact, that genocide is linked to loot in the Middle East, which, displaces millions of Syrians, millions of Iraqis, millions of others. And where do they come? They get spread out, principally locally, but many of them come here. Many people in our country think it's very wrong, the crimes that are being committed in our name, and they protest against them. And there's a group called Palestine Action, you may now have heard of them if you hadn't before, who have been made illegal under the provisions of the Terrorism Act. The provisions of the Terrorism Act. So if you peacefully protest by direct action and paint a plane red, you're a terrorist. But if you take that plane, lease it to a company who lease it to Israel to drop bombs on Palestinians, civilization centers, hospitals, schools, churches, mosques, UN aid facilities, points of distribution of aid, and commit a mass murder, and we don't know even the numbers, because we reached 100,000 many months ago, and we've stopped counting. But different reports leak out, which probably put the figure at 300,000, 400,000 people who have been killed by the Israeli so-called Israeli offense forces, the Israeli army. The Israeli army are foot soldiers of our government, and the Labour Party is very much connected to them. If you open the pages of our free sheet, you'll see a speech by David Lammy saying we still want very good relations with the Israelis based on our shared values. What is that shared value of the Labour Party Foreign Secretary David Lammy and the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu? They're seen so frequently hugging each other. Their common value is genocide in order to loot the peoples of the Middle East and crush the workers of Britain. And it's precisely for that reason that we have to recognize that Labour, far from being our friend, far from being the vehicle of socialism, far from being that thing which, if we somehow reconquer and reclaim and take it over and make it work for us, it will be a vehicle of Labour Party has not been a vehicle of socialism arguably since the First World War, since 1918. Every one of its governments and administrations has acted against the interests of the people. I know that's hard to hear from people who think, oh, they gave up the NHS, and I'm not going to go into that history. If you want that history, chapter and verse, I really encourage you to get hold of this book, Britain's Perfidious Labour Party. Britain's Perfidious Labour Party. Because actually throughout its history, chapter and verse, it's been a vehicle of anti-communism, a vehicle of repression of workers. They love to say the Thatcherite Tory laws, anti-trade union laws are oppressing us, but every administration they get in doesn't get rid of them, they add to them and they perpetuate them and they tie the hands of the unions, and they actually even tell the union leaders, don't make a fuss, because if you make a fuss, you'll make a scene. We'll go out of government and the hated Tories will come back in, and in this way they perpetuate and extend. So they're absolutely the agents of oppression. If you look at that front cover, they're carting away nice upper working class, well-off working class retirees, 60-year-old, 70-year-old, an 82-year-old vicar. They're taking away as enemies of the state because they held up a piece of cardboard in Westminster Square protesting a genocide. And that's a Labour Party government, a Labour Party minister signed a piece of paper that prescribed the right of British workers to take direct action. And interestingly, and I'm going to end on this just as a point so you can just contrast this. What did they do? The minute they had prescribed this direct action group who held up pieces of paper to say we don't like mass murder and genocide being committed in our name, they dissolved Parliament. They went to their little photo shoot. They got all the female members of Parliament to wear nice sashes that said WSPI, Women's Suffragette Movement, Women's Social Suffrage Movement. They basically dressed up in the costume of suffragettes and celebrated the great role that the suffragettes have played in winning the vote and democracy for British women. Do you not see an act of cognitive dissonance? One minute you ban direct action and arrest an 82-year-old woman for holding up a bit of paper in Parliament Square. You call her a terrorist, take her to jail. We're going to pursue her under that terrorist legislation which denies her a jury trial, which denies her knowing the evidence against her, which she can face up to 14 years in prison for, and then you quietly walk away, put that aside. We've done the business of the ruling class. Let's dress up like direct action people fighting for women's votes and take photos of ourselves and celebrate the role of the great bourgeois democracy in winning our freedom. So we are living, I'm going to end now, we're living in a time of increased repression, and we will see that repression. I'm a surgeon, I'm a person who spent my life dedicated to helping others, to saving others, and genuinely as part of my work, I try and do that every day. Sometimes I fail, but I will try and succeed. And with our politics, with our social action, we should be in a place to extend that, to make that a generalized ethos of society. Why can't we have decent food, clothing, housing, shelter for all human beings, regardless of their age, regardless of their financial status, when in the family into which they happen to be born? It's as much not your fault that you were born a white English Anglo-Saxon Protestant as it is Ellie's fault she wasn't, or my fault that I was born into a family of one income bracket, or yours that you were born into another. We're human beings with a common history, a common and shared ancestry, and we can live together and build a beautiful society. To do that, we have to challenge the real property interests of those who really own society. And I put it to you that Labour Party, far from helping us to do that, is repressing everyone who take a single step down that road. So please join with us, come and see our bookstall, come and see us online, go to our website. We've got branches up and down the country which are growing. These are our aims, and I ask you to join us.
Timed because I think our microphone just broke. Any thoughts or contributions from the floor?